Since Israel invaded Gaza in response to the October 7th attacks, protests have broken out around the world calling for a ceasefire. These protests have included everything from Jewish and pro-Israeli counter-protests, heckling of politicians and celebrities, glorification of terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and rampant anti-Semitism. And at the same time, a ceasefire in Gaza looks as remote as ever. However, that is not for lack of trying. Let's discuss why a ceasefire in Gaza is so difficult and what the different sides are really wanting here. And let's discuss what's at stake. It's more than just the continuation of the war, it's the possibility of an all-out war in the Middle East as a whole. Ceasefire negotiations began fairly quickly after Israel began its invasion of Gaza. From the beginning, Israel's first and foremost objective is the return of Israeli hostages taken by Hamas during the October 7th attacks. Hamas, on the other hand, has wanted Israel to withdraw from Gaza and is using the Israeli hostages as leverage. Outside of the ceasefire negotiations, Israel's goals is still the return of the hostages, whether they can be retrieved through negotiated settlement or through forcible retrieval. They also want to make sure that the October 7th attacks can never happen again. And that's done through the comprehensive destruction of Hamas's fighting capability, the control of the Philadelphia crossing between Egypt and Gaza, where Hamas has received covert support, and the control of movement throughout Gaza. And so, Israel has established a buffer zone along the Gaza Strip, with checkpoints and outposts dividing Gaza into 3 different sections. Hamas, on the other hand, is just fighting for survival. And this is something that will get more and more difficult for them as the war progresses, and its key leadership continues to get eliminated. And so the calls for a ceasefire have been amplified by groups sympathetic to Hamas, but also decent people just wanting to end the fighting and for civilians to get a break. It's complicated, and there are genuine good people calling for a ceasefire that have genuine and good reasons for it, though they may not necessarily understand the impact that a ceasefire may have or who exactly that benefits here. The fact that a ceasefire may help Hamas really amps up the tension and allows pro-Israeli groups to paint these folks in a bad light. Further complicating the matter is the growing tension between Israel, Hezbollah, and Iran. Consider first that nobody here wants a wider war. It benefits nobody, and nobody is in a really good position right now to fight and win one. Israel would have to balance a ground war in Gaza with a war against military superior forces to Hamas, which are more on a peer status to the IDF, while political tensions continue to grow at home. Hezbollah would have to fight against a military that will dominate the air and instantly make life difficult for them. Then they'll have to do so in an economically depressed country with growing internal factions who are opposed to Hezbollah and their rule. And Iran would have to worry not just about Israel, but a potential US intervention, all with economic and social pressures that have not gone away. That said, they're all incentivized to fight against each other because Hezbollah's continue to target towns and villages in northern Israel, while Iran supports Hezbollah and other groups in the region, and Israel has continued to target key leadership within both Hezbollah and Iran. At the same time, nobody wants to look like they want a wider war or are going to just push the war into that direction, and so while the ceasefire negotiations are going on, they're going to pull their punches. And that takes us to the ceasefire negotiations themselves. They're important because they're not just directly about the war in Gaza, they're indirectly about a larger Middle Eastern war. The United States, Qatar, and Egypt have all worked together to facilitate the talks between Israel and Hamas for months, and the stakes have grown as the time has gone on. On the table are a few key issues. First, the deployment of IDF troops inside Gaza and the gradual withdrawal. Second, the status of Hamas and the political situation in Gaza. Third, the return of hostages as well as prisoners in Israeli captivity. And finally, the control of the Philadelphia corridor connecting Gaza to Egypt. Post-war, the IDF wants to maintain strong control of the Gaza Strip so that a group that succeeds Hamas after this war will not have the ability to grow to the size and strength that Hamas has. This analysis by Saul Sadka on X shows this in a map, where the IDF will establish lines of control splitting Gaza into different sections with a minimal force. Hamas, of course, wants the IDF to fully withdraw and return to pre-war deployments. This is likely a non-starter for Israel, and it increases the risk of follow-on attacks by Hamas after the war into Israel proper. And it decreases the ability for the IDF to control the movement of Hamas and to prevent these kinds of attacks from being formed. Israel also wants Hamas completely gone and would prefer a different Palestinian political group to oversee Gaza in the future. Of course, Hamas doesn't want this because they've been the ruling party in Gaza for years now. Hamas also wants to ensure the safety of their key leadership, especially following the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, and this is of course likely a complete non-starter for Israel since they're wanting to bring justice to those responsible for the October 7th attacks, and somebody like Yahya Sinwar, who's now in charge of Hamas, probably has a massive target painted on him right now. Israel also wants Hamas to release the hostages that were taken on October 7th. However, at this point we have not seen a lot of specifics on what would guarantee their release. We've seen some cases where Hamas would like the release of their prisoners in Israeli captivity, and we've seen some cases where they're willing to negotiate on the basis of troop withdrawals. However, in those cases we have not seen a lot of success. The negotiations are not just between Israel and Hamas, they're also between Israel and Egypt. When Israel moved into Rafah, they took control of the Philadelphia corridor, which is a series of border crossings connecting Gaza to Egypt. Egypt wants to maintain full control of these crossings and does not want Israel on the other side of the crossing. Israel, however, wants to maintain control of at least parts of the corridor. Hamas has received significant support from Egypt, with several large tunnels being discovered and destroyed by the IDF in the area that connected Gaza to Egypt. These tunnels were large enough to facilitate the movement of larger bulk items, like for instance rockets. Of course, for Israel to make sure that Hamas cannot attack Israel again, they need to make sure that they cannot be armed again, so they have to cut Hamas off from anyone who wants to back them. And this has been a touchy subject for Egypt especially, and a sore point for these talks so far. While talks ran through August, no deal has been made yet, with both Israel and Hamas voicing frustration at each other's inflexibility. This has not stopped the United States from continuing to facilitate the negotiations though, and talks are expected to continue. That said, it appears that battlefield realities will have to compel either side into giving up ground, and given the pace of things, it looks like Hamas is going to have to give up something eventually. That said, it is not all sunshine and rainbows for Israel, so that's really kind of a toss-up. The looming threat of Hezbollah and Iran, as well as the mounting political pressure from the United States and others, is certainly a consideration for Israel. Growing internal pressure with disagreement about the war and frustration with Netanyahu and his government may also compel a quicker resolution. It's a complicated issue with a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of incentives for everyone to reach a deal, however there are reasons for each side to hold their position and continue to fight until their opponent backs down. For Israel, that looks like the continuation of the partition of Gaza and the targeting of the remainder of Hamas. It's also the careful navigation of Hezbollah and Iran, striking where needed but working to avoid unnecessary escalation or a larger war. For Hamas, it's just holding on for dear life, while at the same time continuing its information campaign to paint Israel as a genocidal and fascist power in hopes that political forces in both Israel and Israel's allies can compel Israel to make a deal. And so while the ceasefire talks will continue, so will the protests, and the path to an actual ceasefire will become just more and more frustrating until battlefield realities either force a specific side into giving up some ground, or they're able to make a breakthrough in the diplomatic table. But ultimately, it's not something that anybody can really just snap their finger and make happen. There are real concerns at stake for everybody here, and real reasons for each other to dig in. And the gaps do appear to remain as wide as ever. And until then, the battlefield will have to decide. Comment your thoughts on this. I want to hear what you think about the ceasefire negotiations and where you think they're headed. Leave a like to help this video reach new audiences and to help enrich the conversation below, and subscribe for more videos just like this. With all that, I'll see y'all next time. Later.